This is The Trend, where you'll get enlightened perspective on trending news and topics with amazing commentary. I'm your host, RTL Faith. Welcome to the podcast, and as always, we breathe the message here that we are here to spread discussion, debate, solution, and overall compassion. Welcome back to the podcast. This is The Trend. We are back in action. Little quick update for everybody that are paying attention to everything I'm doing here. Of course, you guys know that I'm publishing these audio podcasts every Tuesday, Sunday, and Friday. Moving forward, Friday will also be guest interviews, so just keep that in mind going forwards. So today we got an excellent episode. We're going to be talking about the importance of Social Security disability, and we got an expert to talk about his knowledge and his opinions regarding the matter. So go ahead, my guy, introduce yourself, tell them what you're about.
Hi, my name is Spencer Bishins. I work for the Social Security Administration, writing disability decisions and reviewing disability decisions for almost 11 years. During that time, I wrote almost 2,000 disability decisions for administrative law judges, and I reviewed a few thousand more on appeal. And after I left the Social Security Administration, I wanted to impart all of that knowledge that I had gained when I worked for SSA, and I wanted to help explain to people why it's so hard to access benefits and the things that claimants and their medical professionals and their support system can do to help make it a little easier to access those benefits that people have paid into and that they're entitled to receive. So I wrote a book, Social Security Disability Revealed, and I think it's an excellent guide. It's an excellent book for explaining the process, explaining the system, but also it's a really good reference material for not only understanding the system, but navigating the system, getting through it at all steps of the process, from the application into the hearing, into the appeals, and it explains how Social Security makes decisions, what kind of evidence you would need to get, and most importantly, how you can get around those barriers that Social Security is constantly putting in your way.
Understood. Very important information, especially with how Social Security is kind of viewed at this point in time in terms of when you get a job, should you have Social Security, being in the military, a lot of different aspects and avenues that we're going to dive into once we do, of course. And as always, I'm sure you guys all know, when I do these episodes, I like to read off a comment, I like to read off a review, just so I'm paying attention to what people are saying about the content. Someone talked about the Little Mermaid situation with the new actress. They said, I don't mind the race. I just want them to CGI or color the hell out of her hair to be the vibrant red. Ariel's three iconic things: a hot rod, redhead, a mermaid, and a hell of a singer. Hit those three things. Everything else doesn't matter to me. Fair point, fair point. Respect. Appreciate you commenting, of course. So, also make sure you guys check out his links. Those will be in the description, and you can check out his website. And when it comes to your website, what's all on there, of course?
Yeah, it's bishinspublishing.com, BISHINS publishing.com. We've got a full description of the book, all the different topics we cover. We have the table of contents so you can see how the book's laid out. We have a bunch of other interview appearances that I've made. We have some articles by my wife who edited the book. And I think most importantly, it's a place where you can just understand what we're saying, what's in the book, why I wrote the book. And if you want to follow us on our social media, there's links on our website for that as well. And of course, all the places you can buy the book in both paperback and ebook format: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, you can ask your local library to get the book in both paperback and ebook format. So tons of information on the website, bishinspublishing.com.
Okay, excellent, excellent. And as always, if people are familiar with the podcast, I'm going to lay up a question that I'm very interested to see your response later on. And the question is very simple. Is there a time you had a conversation, debate, discussion with someone that you disagreed with vehemently? It could be about Social Security, it could be about a different topic altogether. And very curious to see how that conversation went and your feedback about that circumstance. So
I'm
I
gonna I'm gonna I'm gonna help you out with the teaser here. The answer is yes, and we'll talk about that later.
Yes, sir. We'll talk about that later, of course. So, before we dive into the main topic, I want to go over one trending topic at the bare minimum. So, we cover something that is actually very enlightening and very insightful in terms of something that is important, but people don't really think about it.
Breaking news!
And there's a new recent study that went out talk about the importance of good gestures. And basically what the article indicated is that things such as like being kind to someone, offering to hear them out, texting a friend, texting a family member, the value and the importance of these different gestures, and they did a study amongst a lot of different types of people, is immense. It's monumental. People undersell what it means to be a nice person. I think a lot of people nowadays are relatively negative, and it just goes to show you that just like one offer of even small kindness goes a long way. So, something to keep in mind. And what do you think about that idea of just like general generosity amongst people, strangers, family, friends? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's always nice to be polite and kind to other people, but I do think that sometimes where promises are made to us, to all of us, that if you're just a nice person, if you're just a good person, things will turn out well for you. And just with the topic of the show here and my level of expertise, unfortunately, I know that that's not the case. I've just seen so many people who went through their lives doing things the right way, going to work, working overtime, doing what they were told to do, being polite, following the rules, paying their taxes, and and then when they need something from someone else, when they need something from society, from their government, they just get let down. And so I think what you're saying is, of course, great, um, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you should be a nice, kind person, because that's just what we should all do, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that things will always fairy tale their way in the end. Sometimes you really do have to put forth the effort to be a good and kind and nice person, and also deal with life just throwing things at you.
I definitely understand that, and I agree as well in terms of expecting everything to work out just because you're nice is an unrealistic type of thinking, and that's not something I personally abide by. I wouldn't even call myself like a nice person per se, but I will say general generosity, general kindness could at the very least uplift the other party's day. That's something to consider. Reach out to a family member, reach out to a friend. Think about it every once in a while. And so, with that said, we're gonna dive into the main segment. We're the OMU segment is there, but it's an icebreaker. And in terms of this situation, my guy Spencer seems he's ready to talk about his expertise, and I'm not gonna hold him up, of course. So, to start off, when it comes to Social Security disability, Social Security in general, explain to the people what that is exactly, so and people generally understand.
Yeah, it's a great question, because for most of us, uh, we we don't know what the Social Security disability program is. For most Americans, when they hear Social Security, they think that's something I get when I'm older, right? Like I stop working and then I'll get my air quotes Social Security. In other words, I stop working, it's retirement. That's what Social Security is. So a lot of people, it's really common, a lot of Americans who pay into the Social Security system have no idea that Social Security also has a disability component. And it's actually the exact same tax. If you're an employee on your pay stub, you'll see a Social Security tax coming out of your paycheck, and that pays for the retirement benefits if you make it all the way to 66, 67 years old without needing Social Security. But should you become disabled and unable to work due to a medical impairment before then, you're also covered for disability benefits, even if you didn't know you were. You are. And if you're self-employed, on your tax return, you pay the self-employment tax, and that covers the Social Security and Medicare taxes combined. So what is Social Security disability? How do you know if you're disabled? Social Security's definition, it's a bit different from private insurance companies, and it's a bit different from workers' comp and the VA, in the sense that workers' comp asks if you can go back to whatever job it is you were doing when you got hurt. And the VA asks, well, are you fit for military duties? In other words, could you go back to the job you were doing when you were in the military? That's not Social Security's definition. Social Security's definition is, can you do any full-time work that exists in significant numbers in the national economy? Translation, it doesn't matter what you used to do, or what you were trained to do, or what your education is, or even what you would like to do. If there's work that you can do in the national economy, you're not considered disabled under Social Security's rules. And that definition makes it really difficult to prove that you're disabled. So yes, you're paying into the system. Yes, those benefits are there if you become disabled, but you still have to have a substantial amount of medical evidence to prove you're disabled. And that process is not an easy process. It's difficult, it's long, it's specifically designed to make you fail in your attempt to prove that you're disabled. In other words, Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, it's really like any other insurance company in the sense that they make it really easy to pay into the system and extremely difficult to get the benefits out if and when you need them.
Understood. I can see how the value of this knowledge would be very essential because, as you stated, the process seems very strenuous to the average person not knowing what they're doing. So, before we dive into that process to kind of help people kind of take advantage of the situations of the disability insurance, how would a worker or someone that is about to be employed know that they're paying for Social Security? Or if they're not, how do they get Social Security?
That's a really good point, and a really good question, because I was talking to someone somewhat recently, and they told me about the situation where it turned out someone thought they were an employee. That's the language that was used when they were hired. Turns out they were never an employee, and so they were not paying into the Social Security system. But thankfully, it is pretty easy to tell. First thing is, when you're hired, you probably fill out a form called a W-4, and your employer probably asks you for some evidence that you're a US citizen or permanent resident. A lot of people will use a passport because it proves citizenship. You could also use your birth certificate and a photo ID. If you're filling out that form, you're probably an employee. If you're getting a pay stub, when you get paid every week or every 2 weeks, if you're also getting a pay stub from a payroll company and it says taxes that are being withheld from your paycheck, you're probably an employee. And on there, it should say federal income tax and your Medicare tax and your Social Security tax. And then if you live in a state or city that also withholds taxes, those might be on there as well. But if you're in the United States, you should at least see three things. Your three taxes anyway coming out: federal income tax, withholding, and a Social Security tax and a Medicare tax. The other way is at the end of the year, if you're an employee, you'll get a W-2. That's a tax form, and it says how much you earned and all the different taxes that came out, and you report that on your income tax at the end of the year. If you're not getting these things, you may not be an employee. The person might say, I hired you, in air quotes, right? Or might say, I'm your employer and you're my employee. But if you're getting a check, a paycheck, and it's a round number, like exactly $2,000, or you're not getting a pay stub, you're probably actually working as an independent contractor. And at the end of the year, if the form you get is called a 1099, 1099, you're definitely an independent contractor. And it means nothing is being withheld from your paycheck. And so you'll have to pay all the taxes yourself at the end of the year. So yeah, it's really important to know what your status is, because a lot of people think of themselves as employees, but they may actually be independent contractors. And that's important because you have to know how much taxes to pay. You're supposed to do quarterly estimates if you're independent contractor, if you're self-employed. And of course, no matter how much any of us know about the law or taxes, none of us want to get in trouble with the IRS, right? That's
Obviously, yeah.
something we all know we don't want to do. So if for no other reason, it's important because you don't want to get in trouble with the IRS.
Oh yeah, very important knowledge. When the government wants their money, they're gonna get their money. That's just keep that in mind. Okay,
And they have unlimited power. So
100%. Hey, I know firsthand experience, so it's a tough situation. All right, so can you kind of go through the process of taking advantage of the disability insurance? How would someone would go about doing that, the procedure, et cetera, et cetera?
right. So there's a few different ways people become disabled. One common way is an acute injury. I saw a lot of cases when I worked for Social Security where the person was a construction worker or working in a warehouse or a delivery person. And one day something just happens. Something falls on them. They get hurt lifting a heavy box. There's some kind of injury and it's instantaneous and they have to go to the emergency room. And maybe after that, they have difficulty working. But that's not the only way you can become disabled. A lot of people have chronic conditions, conditions that slowly become more significant over time. Think about things like cancer or fibromyalgia, or maybe it's something like a back or a knee condition, but it's not sudden, like a shoulder injury that just gets worse and worse over time. So you can get disability benefits regardless of which of those types of impairments you have, or maybe you have a combination of impairments. Maybe it's that you had something chronic, but you worked through it, and then you have something sudden happen, and that's what prevents you from being unable to work. A lot of people also have mental health impairments. Some of us don't think about anxiety and depression as a medical impairment, but they are considered along with physical impairments in exactly the same way. And a lot of people don't just have one medical condition, right? They'll have a combination. It's like, I got a bad back and maybe I got IBS or a digestive condition or asthma. And also sometimes I have anxiety. And the Social Security Administration is used to seeing that. They understand that for most people, it's not going to be one thing, it's a combination of things. But if any one impairment or a combination of impairments prevents you from doing full-time work, then you can apply for disability benefits. There's an 800 number that you can call. You can go visit a Social Security office in person. But those are very 20th century ways of applying for disability benefits. The way people do it in the 21st century is you go to the Social Security website and you can create a mysocialsecurity.gov account. And then once you've done that, you can apply for Social Security disability benefits right there on the website. And I've not done the application process myself, but I know it'll be like standard questions and they'll ask you about your medical impairments and they'll ask you about your doctors. And the thing is, you don't have to provide all the information in one sitting. It's not like, oh my God, if I forget something, will I get another chance to provide that information? And the answer is yes. You don't get a decision immediately. It takes months. And for some people, unfortunately, it takes years to get through the process.
All
So
right.
that application is really just starting the process. And then the agency is going to send you forms to fill out, and you're going to ask for your medical records. And that's when we start to get into the process that I explain in the book, where I tell you the difference between the SSDI and SSI programs and what happens after you apply, who's going to make the decision in your case. It's not a quick process.
All right.
It's slow, it's laborious. You're going to have to fill out lots of forms. They'll probably get lost and you'll have to fill them out again. And um, and as I said earlier, and as I say in the book, the system is not set up to make it easy for you to get those benefits. It is exactly the opposite. Social Security will make you think we're just an independent, neutral decision maker. We're just here to see if you meet the definition of disability. And while that's true on paper, in reality, everything that happens along the way is intended to be a barrier, to be an obstacle that you have to get past. And it's because they're trying to make it difficult so
All
that
right.
people give up. So that people give up and they drop out, or they say, I'm just can't do this anymore. I'm tired of this. Because again, they want to be approving as few people as possible, because that's what keeps the Social Security program, that's part of what keeps the Social Security program afloat, is that they're taking in benefits, but they try not to pay out too much in benefits. Otherwise, the Social Security system would just collapse.
Understood. So from like outside looking in, it definitely seems like it's kind of like corrupt. I don't know if that's the right word, but if I'm just a layman person, just random person, I'm going like, yo, this is hopeless, right? This is hopeless.
Yeah.
And you said this is what keeps them afloat. Is there any way to really save this system? Is there any way for someone, the average person, to really get through this laborious, procedure?
I just want to start by saying no one should be hopeless, even if you haven't read the book, because a lot of people are approved. It takes a long time and a lot of evidence, and you might have to go through several denials and appeals. But in the end, about half the people who apply are eventually at some point in the process approved. Um, but of course, if you know where the obstacles are along the way, you know how to find a good representative to represent you at your hearing, you know what kind of evidence the agency is looking for. The whole point of the book, right? The reason I wrote the book, Social Security Disability Revealed, is I wanted to give people this information so that they could navigate the system and give themselves the best possible chance at success. So my goal in writing the book is to restore hope, to restore empowerment, and to help the whole system seem a little bit less scary. You know, if you know what's going to happen, and it's like anything else, like let's say you're getting a cavity filled, right?
Right.
It sounds scary, but once the dentist explains, you know, I'm going to have to give you a Novocaine shot and it's going to numb you up, and then you'll hear the drill, but it won't hurt. Just knowing the process makes it a little bit less anxiety producing, you know, and then as you're going through and you think like, oh, the dentist explained this really well. I'm glad I understand this process. Now I know how to get through it. It's kind of the same thing. I want people to feel like they can understand the process so that they can have the confidence that they can get through this. But as far as fixing the system, unfortunately, that's going to take an act of Congress. And they don't
Right.
call Social Security the third rail of politics for nothing. Social Security and Medicare are programs that Congress, no individual member of Congress ever wants to talk about. And then collectively trying to get Congress to change this program, it's just probably not going to happen. So the last chapter in the book about a universal basic income system. I explain why a UBI would be a much better system than the public benefits system that we have now in the United States. But ultimately, I do explain like that's kind of a long-term, you know, theoretical standpoint. Like, here's how we could make this better. But ultimately, I do want people to understand the first 33 chapters of the book are in there because this is the system that we have now.
Right.
And while we could make it better, today's claimants who can't work right now, they need help now, right? They
Right.
need to know how to get through the system as it is. And there's really no shortcut. You have to learn the system. You have to learn why it's set up the way it is, why those obstacles are put in your way, what they are, and then why they're there. And then you can understand how to get around them, which ones are more scarier than others, which ones are more substantial than others, which obstacles or problems maybe might not affect you. But ultimately, you have to understand the process. And there are a lot of other books out there about Social Security disability.
Right.
But when I left Social Security, what I noticed is a lot of those books are written by claimants representatives who are just selling their services, or they're like DIY books. Here's how you can do this all on your own without any help. And after reviewing and writing several thousand disability decisions, I can tell you it is not a good idea to do any legal. I'm a lawyer, and I can say it's not a good idea to do any legal process on your own. And it's particularly a bad idea to do the Social Security disability process on your own. I have a chapter in the book called Don't DIY This.
Understood.
You want to get a professional. The rules and the procedures are so complex that without professional help, you really could say or do something that will be extremely detrimental to your claim. And in the book, I give an example of someone who has the perfect set of circumstances to be approved, except she doesn't know what she's doing. It's a hypothetical example, of course, and she
Right.
doesn't know what she's doing, and she says the wrong thing, and that causes her to be denied. And if she just had a professional helping her, she would have been approved. And when we're talking, 10, 15 years of benefits, this can be like over $100,000 of Social Security and Medicare benefits over the course of time. So it's really a very important thing for the people who are applying for these benefits. So you got to know the system, and you got to know when you need professional help, but also the parts that you need to handle on your own, like talking to your doctors and getting your own medical records, right? That's not something a lawyer can help you with. You're the one in your doctor's office, and you got to know what to say and what kind of documentation to get ready for your disability claim before you even get started with your
Okay.
application.
All right. So it definitely sounds like it's a very long process and there's a lot of stuff you need to know. Would you say
Yeah.
one of the, other than obviously reaching out, one of the important steps from what it sounds like is to get like legal counseling, get professional help to make sure what you're doing is correct. At the very least, if not the first time, maybe the second time, so it's not more strenuous than it has to be.
Yeah. It's really important to know where to start. And like we just said, you asked me how you get started. Well, you technically start an application on the Social Security website, right? That's the first time you tell Social Security you want the benefits. But actually, really, if you think about it, you're getting started even before that, right? Because you have to have medical records to show you're disabled. And Social Security's definition is that you have to be disabled for a full 12 months. So if you're thinking about maybe filing a disability application in the future, you got to start now getting your records gathered. But maybe that means maybe you have an appointment to go see a doctor. Well, you got to know what to tell that doctor in that appointment, what to talk about, what kind of records you're going to need, what kind of tests maybe that you might need to have run to prove a particular impairment. And if you know that ahead of time, you can talk to that doctor and say, hey, I have this back condition, I have back pain. Are we going to run? Are we going to get an MRI? Are you going to do a physical exam and a straight leg raise? Are you going to check my extension testing? You got to know what sorts of things Social Security looks for to prove an impairment, right? And yeah, a lawyer can help you with a lot of that. But actually, the time when people typically get legal representation is later on in the process.
Okay.
A lot of people don't even hire a lawyer until after they've been denied once or twice because they think like, oh, I'll just get my medical records and I'll give them to Social Security and I'll get approved, right? And it
Right.
won't be a problem. And then over 70% of claimants are denied at the initial level. And for a lot of people, from I would guess probably for everyone who's denied, that's a shock. It's totally, completely a shock. Like, how did they not approve me? I gave them my medical records. How did they not approve me? And so that's the point in the process where a lot of people will hire a representative because the representative can help you get your records organized and can help write a legal brief to the judge and represent you at your hearing, or they can help you with an appeal. But like I said, they're not going into your doctor's office with you. So there are certain things that a representative can help you with, but there are certain things that you just have to know how to do on your own. And the reason I wrote the book is nobody tells you what those things are, right?
Exactly.
Nobody tells you what kind of evidence you need to show your medical impairment or even the definition of disability. And so I wrote this book. I am a lawyer. I worked as an attorney advisor for SSA, but I didn't write this book with like legal speak. I actually tried to do the opposite. I tried to take all of the legal official terminology and like break it down into normal person English and take all of the acronyms and abbreviations and things that are like written in a way that's deliberately trying to confuse you and just say, look, here's what this actually means. Like, here's what this means in normal English so you can understand what your representative or the judge is saying. And also, like, if you go on the Social Security website, you'll get a lot of legal terms that are confusing. So in the
Right.
back of the book, I put an index, and it's a plain language index. Like if you see RFC, residual functional capacity, those are like three big words and they're confusing. All that means is like the most you can do when your impairments are taken into account. What can you do as far as work with your impairments? That's just one example. But throughout the book, of course, I'm constantly explaining, like, here's what the agency is telling you. Because if you just go on the agency's website, they're not going to translate that into normal English, right? They're just going to say, here's what this in the law. But that's not really fair. It's not really fair to individual people who, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, they're just trying to be good people, kind people, be good neighbors,
Right.
do their job, help out their boss when their boss says, I need you to stay late today. They're just trying to get through life, being good, kind people, doing what they think is expected of them. And then when they can't work for some reason, they just want someone to be kind and nice to them in return. And that's not the government, unfortunately. The government doesn't care that you're a good person. The government is going to do what they can to discourage you throughout that process. And I want to do what I can to help you understand the things that you need to understand in order to get the benefits that you deserve because you paid into the system.
Very, very enlightening. Yeah, Social Security, I've really never even talked about the system, never even thought about the system at all. But the value seems self-explanatory. And we're to move up to the final segment, and then we're gonna start wrapping things up, of course. And this is PC or C, politically correct or canceled. I'm gonna answer a very important question for you. In terms of Social Security, it seems inherently valuable. It not only can you get it at the age of, would you say, 66, 66 and a half?
66 to 67, depending
Right.
on the year you were born. For people our age, it's 67.
67, and obviously disability and mental, physical. There's a lot of different kinds. Now, the system of Social Security, I've heard some people argue, hey, I don't want to pay my taxes for someone else's Social Security. Do you think this should be a right that every citizen in America should receive?
I mean, the thing with people who don't want to pay taxes for other people to get a benefit is what that logic, the fallacy in that logic is that that person doesn't ever see themselves needing that benefit, right?
True, very true.
And I can't tell you how many times I saw a claimant who was only eligible for, so there's two programs, SSDI, which is the insurance program when you pay the Social Security tax. And if you didn't pay the Social Security tax and you don't have enough credits, you can get SSI, Supplemental Security Income, but the benefit's much lower. It's a much more unstable program. It's just not as good. And I can't tell you how many times I saw an SSI application and the person was working and the judge said to them, well, you were working. I don't understand. Why don't you qualify for the Social Security disability insurance program? I was getting paid under the table. I didn't want to pay the tax. And so what people would do is sometimes they'll basically dodge taxes because they don't want to pay the tax.
Gotcha.
And then they become injured and need Social Security benefits. And guess what? Social Security disability insurance is not there for them because they don't qualify because they weren't paying the tax. It's like any other insurance program. You have to pay into the system before you end up needing it. If you decide, okay, now I need it, now I'd like to go pay into it, please. That's not how insurance works, right?
Exactly.
You have to be paying in before you end up needing to file a claim. So, yeah, there's a lot of people who don't want to pay in. They don't trust the system. They don't like the government. But then a lot of those people end up needing something from the government. They'll need disability benefits or Medicaid or a housing benefit or SNAP or WIC or TANF or anyone, of this wide, vast array of federal benefits. So I think it's very short-sighted. Even if you have some resources, even if you think that's not something I'll ever need, either everyone pays into the system or it's not there for everyone.
Right.
Public benefit systems rely on everyone to pay in. As I'm sure you know, most countries in the world, all of Europe, have a public healthcare system. Canada has a public healthcare system.
Right.
Everyone has to pay in. And even if you think, I don't need to see a doctor, I'm fine. Even if you think you'll never need it, you never know when you're going to get in a car accident, when you're going to fall, when something's going to happen, and you're going to need to call an ambulance, and you're going to need to go to a hospital. So, yeah, if we want to have good, robust public systems, whether it be a public healthcare system, a disability system, if we want to have really good access to public systems, even something like a public library, right? We
Right.
have to all agree to pay into that system, even if we don't anticipate using it. So I think that everyone should be willing to pay in. It's really not a lot. Like public, because the United States is so massive, because we have 330 million people,
Right.
we really don't pay in very much to all have access to these things. Uh, and the benefit when you need it, if you need it, the benefit obviously at that point far outweighs what you've paid in. So yeah, if we want to have a guarantee, if we want to have access to certain things, public hospitals, public libraries, public defenders, if we're arrested and charged with the crime,
Right.
we public roads that we all drive on, right? We have to agree to pay a certain amount into the system. And if we don't pay in, if we're not willing to pay for nice things, then we're not going to have nice things as a society.
Right. And he's completely right about that. Even if you want to be extremely negative and say, yo, these people don't deserve it, in terms of the grand scheme of things, the amount of people, let's say your friend that you just don't know, he may do something that causes him to get injured. You don't want him to be disadvantaged and suffer through a very, disadvantaged work situation where he can't work and he can't provide for his family. Of course, you don't want that. So these things are important in the grand scheme of things, and you, in terms of social security, it's for, I know hindsight is 2020, but you don't want to be thinking like that. You want to always be thinking about what if, and
Yeah,
that's very
and
important.
can I say one more thing about the deserve it argument?
Go
I
for it.
talk about I talk about this in the book. I have a whole chapter called "Why Fraud, Waste, and Abuse is Not a Thing." Uh, We hear that a lot, right? With
Right.
public benefits. Well, there's people who are just they're committing fraud or they're wasting money or they're abusing the system. That's not a thing with Social Security disability. The amount of medical evidence that someone has to have to show they can't do any work in the national economy for a full 12 months is extraordinary. I looked at medical records. That was my job, listening
Right.
to a hearing, reviewing medical records, and I wrote hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of denials for people with really good medical evidence and doctors saying this person can't work, they're disabled. And those were denials. So the amount of evidence that you have to get an approval from Social Security, it's extraordinary. This idea that people are just like waking up one day and deciding they'll defraud Social Security, I'll go get disability benefits. Like you just can't do it. And it wouldn't make sense financially to try anyway, because even if you were faking it, the amount of times you would have to go to a doctor and fake it, and the amount of evidence you would have to gather over such a long period of time for what, 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 bucks a month in disability benefits, it just doesn't make any sense. You could go
Yeah.
work during that 2 years instead of trying to get fake medical records. And that's not even taking into account the fact that all you have to be, it only takes one time being caught. And now you're looking at a federal criminal charge for lying for
Exactly.
Social Security. There's no incentive financially for trying to fake a disability claim. Some people maybe try, but they're actually quite easily caught. So this idea that maybe some people have that, well, some people don't deserve benefits. There's a lot of people who deserve benefits who cannot get them. So
Okay.
you can imagine that the people who are getting them, it's like you have to show such tremendous evidence and proof over such a substantial period of time. You just can't like fake your way into that.
Well, there you go. You heard it from expert's mouth. Comes when it comes to Social Security, don't even think about fraud. It ain't gonna happen.
No,
So,
and if you want a more detailed version than I just gave you, it's in the book.
of course, go check out the book. So, last thing, of course, we laid up the question in the beginning. What about that situation where you disagree with the person vehemently? How did the conversation go? And do you look back on that conversation and go like, I could have handled this better?
Yeah, so I've had lots of conversations with Social Security judges throughout my time there. The judge is the person who holds the hearing and makes the actual approve or deny decision. And then they pass the medical record off to a staff attorney. And that was my role. I was a staff attorney with SSA. And the staff attorneys are actually the ones who write the decision. So if you are a disability claimant and you get a decision, it has the judge's name at the bottom, but the judge didn't actually write that decision. A staff attorney wrote it, and then they give it to the judge, and the judge looks it over, makes a couple of edits and changes, and then signs it. But this, as you can imagine, can create problems where what if the judge says, okay, deny this claim? And then the attorney who has to write the decision says, well, judge, I don't think we should deny it. I'm looking at the evidence and I see MRIs, x rays, surgical reports, and 3 doctors saying this person can't work. Like
Right.
we just talked a minute ago, right, about how hard it is to get approved. There's people who have records that look like that, And judge will still say, I don't believe them. For whatever reason, I don't find them credible, deny the claim. And then you have the situation where the judge is saying, deny the claim. And me, my job is to do what they're telling me to do, but I don't necessarily have good evidence to deny the claim.
Right.
And this happened more than once. There were so many times when I would disagree with the judge, and I'd physically walk into their office and say, okay, let's talk about this, because I respect you as the judge in your decision,
Right.
but I'm the one that has to write it. And I can't make up evidence, right? The evidence in the record is what's in the record. So I got to know what you want me to do. You ask for one in particular, and I'll give you one in particular. I once had a case. I was the attorney reviewing the record, 19 medical opinions, 1-9, 19, every single one suggested this person was disabled. 19 out of 19. And the judge wanted to deny the case. And I had to go to that judge and say, based on what? We don't have a single medical opinion. It's not like it's 18 out of 19 and we have one that we can cite to.
Right.
I had 0. I literally had to go through 19 different medical opinions and explain why every single one was unpersuasive, despite the fact that we had 19 consistent medical opinions. It makes no sense, right? But that was a situation where I had to talk to that judge and try and figure out, what do you want me to put in here? Like, how do you want me to deny this claim? I don't understand. And I mean, that's hard to do when you have 1 or 2 medical or 3 medical opinions saying someone's disabled.
Right.
Obviously, as you can imagine, the more opinions saying someone's disabled, the better that case is to approve them. And obviously, I had lots of cases like that where the judge said, yeah, go ahead and approve it. And I was able to write approvals. And I wrote a lot of approvals. And so I know the amount of evidence you need in order to get a case approved. But yeah, trying to butt heads, or having to butt heads with a judge, trying to understand what that person wants in a decision when they don't have to write the decision. I'm the one that has to do that. And I don't
Understood.
understand how you want me to do it. That can get really tough. But ultimately, you have to know, within Social Security, the judge does make the final decision.
Yeah.
And so if the judge says, just do it, the staff attorney's job is to go back to their office and whatever their personal opinion is, set that aside and figure out how to take what the judge wants and put that on paper. And that can be really, really difficult sometimes.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. And it just shows you, like in any field, and especially yours, when you're handling very serious situations that impact people's lives, that disagreements are had, and you just got to do what you got to do to make sure you're trying to adhere to every party in this situation. So definitely respect that.
Little bit of a positive note at the end here, though. I do explain this process in the book, how the judges arrive at their decisions,
Right.
how those decisions are written, and how sometimes, particularly when there's disagreement between the person writing the decision and the judge, how sometimes that can leave a little bit of room for an appealable issue. So if you do get a decision like that, I explain in the book how to read those decisions and how to understand them, and how to maybe look for something that you could then use to appeal that decision if you are denied,
Right.
because there's an appeals process, and that's always an avenue. If you are denied, you can always appeal and maybe get that decision thrown out and start over with a different judge. So yeah, like we said at the beginning, there's a lot of things in this book that are kind of a downer,
Right.
but that's just reality. And I didn't want to sugarcoat anything. I want to make sure people understand that happens. And I have written lots of decisions for people when their own doctor said they couldn't work. But you have to know how to look at that, how to be upset at that decision, but then how to do something constructive with that
Right.
anger and know, okay, I'm not going to let this stop me. I'm going to appeal this decision. I know how to do that. And I know what my next step is. There's always a next step.
Exactly. There's plenty of solutions that you could find. Checking out Spencer's book, and again, name your book and let them know where you could find it.
Yeah, Social Security Disability Revealed, why it's so hard to access benefits and what you can do about it. Bishinspublishing.com, BISHINS publishing.com has links to all the different places to buy the book. If you're an Amazon person, which stats tell me most of you are, you could just go right into Amazon and search Social Security Disability Revealed and get it in paperback or ebook formats.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, this is very valuable information. Appreciate you coming on, Spencer, and explaining not only the process, but giving people hope that, hey, even though it's difficult, there's a way for me to figure out the situation. And one of the things that can do in terms of resources is get your book, of course. So hope everybody enjoyed the podcast and y'all have a good one. Take care. Peace. Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast episode. Just a reminder to never miss an episode. They publish Tuesday, Friday, and Sunday at 7 a.m. EST. So if you're driving to work or you're working out, tune into the podcast. Also consider visiting the website www.thetrendwithrtlfaith.com and leave a review so I can personally thank you for your support to the podcast. So again, thank you so much for listening. And remember that solutions can only really be made through proper conversation and discussion. Take care.